Lots of attention, as there always is, around the quarterbacks at the just completed NFL Scouting Combine. This class, considered one of the best in years. Some of those guys threw on Saturday, some did not, but still the buzz continues to grow. For the Seattle Seahawks and general manager John Schneider, they actually had formal interviews over the weekend with some of the top prospects at the quarterback position. Could they be eyeing a big move up the board? And if they are, what would it cost? How realistic or unrealistic is it? I'll take a look back at some historical trades up for teams looking to get their next quarterback. And we'll see if maybe we think the Seahawks have a shot to do that themselves. That's coming up today on Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Be sure to like this video on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell button for notification of new episodes. If you prefer audio, you can catch the show on any platform that you prefer, but on Spotify for less than $1 a month. And it's not going to stay that way forever. But right now you can subscribe to the show, and then you get to listen to episodes that don't have any ads in them at all. You can also buy me a coffee or a beer at buymeacoffee.com. All those links will be down in the description. Welcome back from the weekend, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the Combine. I always do, although this year I will say this. I had some difficulty recording it. I don't know how many of you are doing the streaming thing now. But I started out when I cut cable finally after years and years and decades with Comcast. I used to always just be of the mindset that, you know what, it does cost a lot more, but you get everything you need to get and it's more reliable. It's worth the price. But I used Fubo last year because it has Root Sports in their package. So I could watch Mariners, Kraken, etc. But during the football season, I switched over to YouTube television. I like the interface better. And at the time, those of you that followed me and Dana O'Gorman, what we were doing on the PSF app, there was just less latency, less lag. And so we were able to time those live streams up a little bit better. But the recording function is weird. And if any of you use YouTube TV, maybe you can get back to me on what I'm doing wrong. But I'll add something to the library, which is how you record something there. But it wouldn't necessarily record the entire program. And maybe that has to do with NFL Network and how they name their programs, because I think some of the Combine sessions spilled over into what was scheduled as their NFL Total Access programming. So maybe that's why it cut off. But I wasn't able to see the whole linebacker workout just on my first recording. Had to go kind of seek it out on NFL Network and YouTube and that kind of thing. But ended up getting to watch everything I wanted to watch. And of course, yesterday, the big dudes, the offensive linemen, and what a great class that is. You know, lots to talk this offseason here on the show and elsewhere about how the Seahawks now under Mike McDonald need to build from those trenches and need help on that interior offensive line. It's a good year to do it. The interior, not as great as that tackle class. We're going to talk a lot about the draft over the next few weeks, right? But it just makes you wonder if maybe, especially with the questions around Abe Lucas at right tackle, the Seahawks are going to want to dip into that class because it is so strong. But today we're going to talk again about quarterbacks because the buzz does not, it has not died down. It continues to grow. But the possibility of the Seahawks making a bold move in the first round to secure a guy that they feel might be their franchise quarterback moving forward. Can they do that at 16? Possibly. It's possible. It's still possible that 2 of those 6 may be available at 16. And we'll obviously get a better feel for that as we move closer to the draft and get some of the feedback from around the industry there. But it's become more clear even after the Combine that there seem to be 3 that stand above the rest, potentially a 4th. And then Bo Nix and Michael Penix. There's some disparity when it comes to trying to find consensus on those guys. Thought Bo Nix looked fine at the Combine, but questions about his legitimate arm strength, his ability to push the ball down the field, especially between the hash marks. He didn't do a lot to dispel those concerns at the combine. He looked fine, and his tape is great, and his experience is great. And I suspect that evaluations from team to team on Bo Nix are going to vary across the board. Michael Penix has been kind of a mystery throughout this whole thing, mostly because of the medical reports. I think it might be a little bit more mysterious now because the medical reports at the combine that he received came back positive. And we saw him doing the workouts without a knee brace on. He wore a knee brace in all the games at Washington. And he was probably the best of the quarterbacks that chose to throw. He was, I think, universally, it seems like the opinion is that he threw better than anyone there. And then you have J.J. McCarthy. He's kind of this year's Anthony Richardson in the sense that he's sort of the wild card, the guy who's climbing the charts with the bullet, as they used to say in the record business. And there are some reports today, I think it was Albert Breer mentioned in his column that he talked to some league executives, and one told him that he expects quarterbacks to go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that only leaves, assuming that the fourth would be McCarthy, and that seems to be the momentum, that would only leave Nix and Penix potentially getting to 16. But as I pointed out on a show a couple weeks ago, there are easily 9 teams that I think we could probably all agree on are looking quarterback. Some of them may choose to go other routes this year. Some of them may choose to dip into the veteran free agent group. Cousins, Russell Wilson released today. We knew that was coming. Or trade for Justin Fields or sign Baker Mayfield. Doesn't sound like he's such a lock now to go back to Tampa Bay, although that does seem to be the direction they're leaning, especially after signing Mike Evans to that big extension today. You would think that those two things would tend to go hand in hand. And so obviously we're going to know a lot more a month from now after the start of free agency heading into the draft, and it'll clear some things up. But today, as we sit here today, you can identify 9 teams that you can make a strong case are going to go quarterback. Inevitably, 1 or 2 of those teams every year that we think is hunting quarterback surprises us. Right? What if the Las Vegas Raiders choose to wait, give Aiden O'Connell another year, sign a veteran, maybe a Ryan Tannehill, or maybe they're in play for Russell Wilson or Justin Fields? So we'll know more after some of those dominoes fall. And today, Ryan Poles of the Bears said he's willing to wait out the free agency period before he makes a move with Justin Fields. So I wanted to take a look back at what the history really does look like in quarterback trades and for teams moving up to get a quarterback and see if I could find some sort of context. You know, Rob Staten is convinced that he thinks the Seahawks may be eyeing a move up the board. First, let me start before I get into the historical trades. The pros and cons of moving up or not. And the fan base is divided on this. Certainly you can see it on Twitter. It doesn't take long to find it, that some are in favor of doing whatever it takes. And Rob actually made a pretty good point in a recent column that, and I tend to agree with this, that we talked a lot on this show last year about how we thought the talent, and John Schneider even admitted, and he thought the team underperformed. We thought the talent exceeded the production on the field, that better coaching could have gotten more out of that exact same roster. So if you believe that, in everything that we hear about this coaching staff the Seahawks have brought in, if there's one thread that kind of ties them all together, it's that they all are known as great teachers who get the most out of their players. And so if you look at the roster and you think there's talent there that hasn't been realized, and we've just hired this coaching staff that is supposed to be better at getting the most out of their players, then wouldn't that lend itself to the possibility of sacrificing some assets in order to go get that guy? regardless of how you feel about Geno Smith or Drew Lock or how long you think those guys will be around. So I kind of broke down some pros and cons, and then we'll get into the what we think the trade cost might be. And then I'll let you guys decide whether you feel comfortable with that or not. The pros to trading up, or not necessarily pros to trading up, but things that might indicate that it's in the offing. Schneider keeps bringing it up. He keeps bringing up drafting quarterbacks, unprompted. He keeps reminding us that he's only drafted 2 in 15 years, that he was taught by Ron Wolf and coming up through the Green Bay system, that that's not how you do it. You draft quarterbacks every year if you can, and you let that work itself out. He keeps bringing it up. It's clearly on his mind. There is a sense among the industry out there that seems to lean towards that John Schneider, especially now that he's unencumbered, now that he is president of football ops and general manager, no more Pete Carroll, no one else has final say on the roster. It's all his baby now, that he is itching to draft the next quarterback. That he really enjoyed the process last year when they had the 5th pick and they got to hang out with all those guys and legitimately consider the possibility that they'd be able to draft one of those top quarterbacks last year. And they're, we'll never escape this. There is the thought, the belief that the Seahawks very well may have taken Anthony Richardson at 5 last year over Devin Witherspoon if he was available, that he was at the top of their board. So that's another one, that he might just be itching to pull the trigger on this. And also that this class seems to be very top heavy, very all or nothing, that there's a huge cliff after the top 6. I was hoping some guys would kind of step forward at the combine over the weekend and sort of make a statement. And there were guys that performed at a level that I think exceeded what we were expecting from them, but none of them really jump out to me as that guy might be the next Russell Wilson. You might be able to take that guy in the 3rd or 4th, and he will be a long-time starting franchise quarterback. Right? I thought Spencer Rattler showed off his arm talent, but didn't really, didn't look like a franchise quarterback to me. Devin Leary, I thought, looked better than I expected. So did Keaton Slovis. But again, are those guys, do you see either of those guys being a long-term starting quarterback? And then, of course, the unknown is Jordan Travis, who didn't compete because he's coming back off that leg injury. So we don't know about him. But it seems to be 6 guys and then a whole lot of wishing. And you know what they say about wishing in one hand, and right, not going to say it. The cons, or the argument against moving up to take a quarterback, is kind of the same, that there are 6. That Nix or Penix might very well be there at 16. If they have them rated high enough, they might just be able to let the draft come to them. The other argument against moving up or being aggressive for a quarterback in the 1st round, they have a good quarterback. They have a very solid, good, league average, viable starting quarterback under contract, and arguably 2, because we keep hearing about how much John Schneider likes Drew Lock, who's much younger than Geno, and how they want to bring him back. And then he was going to talk to his agent at the combine about potentially doing that again. John Schneider may, in his mind, have a plan. Say hello to Spooky, everybody. Right there. Oh, sorry. Had the depth wrong. He may, in his mind, think, okay, we're going to do this. Geno's going to play as long as he can, or as long as he's successful. But at some point, it's Drew's. Drew Lock may be John Schneider's Jordan Love. It's possible. Also, kind of touched on this already. The middle class, not good. There don't appear to be any Russell Wilson or Nick Foles, in the middle rounds this year. Another one. There are other ways to get a younger, potential long-term developmental quarterback. If the Seahawks loved Sam Howell in the draft, well, they didn't love him enough to draft him before the 5th round 2 years ago. But if they really liked him, and there was some speculation that year that they would because he throws the deep ball so well, they could get him for a day 3 pick. from the Commanders if they want him. Desmond Ridder is another one that we know the Seahawks brought in for a 30 visit 2 years ago during his draft cycle. If they think he's a guy that could develop into a starter, he can be had from Atlanta. So there's other ways to go about doing it as well. And then the final point, and one that's going to lead right into what we're going to talk about next, is they might just not have the ammunition to go get it. Because here's what it might take. And I wanted to look back and try to find, gosh, is there any of these trades? I couldn't really remember off the top of my head. Were any of them from 16-ish up to, top 3 or maybe inside the top 10? What you're going to find as I go through this is, my God, the inflation, the cost of trading up for a quarterback in the last few years has become exorbitant. And in some cases, and maybe that'll be what we determine today, or some of you will discern from this, cost prohibitive. 2016, the Rams traded up from 15, but all the way to 1 for Jared Goff. But listen to this. Now, granted, this is 8 years ago. The Rams this is what it cost them to move up to 1. An additional first-round pick. I don't like saying, let's just get this out of the way. I don't like saying they traded 2 first-round picks and 2 seconds. To me, in my mind, the way I wrap my head around this is you trade places in the first round, right? So they move up from 15 to 1, they swap first-round picks. So the way I would word this is they traded an additional first-round pick in the next season, plus 2 seconds and 2 thirds. And then they also got back a couple of day 3 picks from the Titans. That's a lot. That would certainly be much more expensive now, and we'll get to that in a little bit when you look at what happened last year for Bryce Young. The Seahawks wouldn't be able to move up from 16 to 1 for 2 seconds, 2 thirds, and a first. And they don't have a second this year. 2017, this is one that stuck in my head, but I'd forgotten how far the Chiefs had to come up to get Mahomes at 10. They came up from 27. So 17 spots, right? They sent an additional first-round pick and a third-round pick. So they spent a future first and a current third to go from 27th to 10th. That doesn't seem like a lot. I don't think you're going to get that this year. That doesn't seem to be the trend. Just quickly, a couple others. 2009, the Jets go from 17 to 5. Now, this might be, again, inflation. You're going to see that in a second. But this might be more of the scenario we're talking about. I think it's completely unrealistic for this to think that the Seahawks might be able to jump up into the top 3 if they want Maye or Daniels. But whoever's left, if they want McCarthy and you think 4 or 5 is where you have to go to get it, then this would be a little bit more of a parallel. So they send their first round pick, 17 overall, to go up to 5 and a second round pick, but then they sent 3 players too. That one was a little unique. 2011, the Jaguars went from 16 to 10 for Gabbert, and all it cost him was a second round pick back in 2011. That's crazy to think that, right? 2018, the Bills trade from 12 to 7. They send their first round pick, number 12, and 2 second round picks to Tampa Bay for their first round pick, number 7. So it only cost them 2 seconds to move from 12 to 7. That's insane to me too. Because then when you look at last year and what it cost for the Panthers to go from 9 to 1 to draft Bryce Young, they had to send a first rounder, 2 seconds, and a very, very good player in DJ Moore in the prime of his career to move up just 8 spots. Here's what is being tossed around now. Ben Solak today reported that he talked to a number of league executives about what it would cost the Commanders to go from 2 to 1, right? Remember, they just hired Cliff Kingsbury as their offensive coordinator. And he obviously has the relationship, right, to move up for Caleb Williams if they wanted to do that. If the Bears are just as in love with Maye or Daniels, they want to move back 1 spot and get some draft capital in the process. One league executive told him the conversation would start at 2 firsts. Again, one additional first. Someone else said, I would ask for their first, obviously, to move back to 2, next year's first, and a second this year, to move up 1 spot. So imagine what it would cost the Seahawks, conceivably, to move from 16 to 1, 2, or 3. They don't have a second round pick. Now, we could talk about what the Panthers did. I touched on this in the show the other day. Are there any players that might carry some value? Right? If you look at DJ Moore being involved in that deal last year, would DK Metcalf have some value to a young team as a guy, let's bring in a big time weapon to add to our offense? I don't know. That salary is legitimate. The cap hit is significant. You'd be taking that on as the acquiring team as well. And it's a loaded receiver class. Again, you have to consider the market. To find a team in the top 5 that would be interested in moving back outside of Arizona, but they're not going to do a deal with the Seahawks. They're not going to help the Seahawks get a franchise quarterback. But if you consider, let's just say top 5, top 6, if you think you have to get up there to get a McCarthy or whoever kind of surprisingly falls, you'd have to give up at least 1 future first-round pick. That in and of itself, in a vacuum, I don't think is a big deal. Because again, if you believe that the Seahawks roster has a bunch of young talent, as I do, and you believe that this new coaching staff is going to get more out of them because the last staff did not, as I do, then sacrificing a first-round pick to do that is a small price to pay, I think, for landing your long-term answer at quarterback. But it's going to take a lot more than that. And you don't have the second this year to throw in there. You have an extra third. You also have some needs to fill and not a lot of cap space as we sit here today to fill those needs. One player that continues to stand out for me as a possibility is, I think we can talk about Reek Woolen. What would make him so attractive to certain teams is the premium on cornerbacks. And yes, this is a loaded class, but you'd be getting a guy on his rookie deal with 2 years of experience under his belt. And he's different than most of the corners in this draft. None of them are 6'4". None of them have the length of Woolen, at least not the ones projected to go in the first and second round. Maybe Mike McDonald looks at Reek's tape and thinks, I'd like to be a little more physical there. Maybe I like Trey Brown. Maybe I like the idea of Witherspoon being full-time on the outside and not in the slot anymore. Maybe because of the depth of the cornerback class in this year's draft, he thinks he can get a guy in the 3rd round. Or maybe he thinks Mike Jackson will fit his system really well. I think he might. He's a restricted free agent that the Seahawks could bring back just by tendering him. I think he might be the only guy on the roster that has that kind of trade value because of the cost, because he's on a rookie deal and he has so much upside. I think trying to talk about trading DK Metcalf, or some have even suggested Tyler Lockett, is wishful thinking because you see the potential cap savings and you imagine what the team can do with that. But you have to think about what the acquiring team is going to want as well. I think it's tough. I think it's really tough. And I think most likely when you look at the history and you look at this and you see some of the reports that are out there, what it would cost. Again, a future first and a second to move from 2 to 1. My goodness. What would it take to get from 16 to 3 even? I still tend to think this is John Schneider doing his due diligence, wanting to get to know the class in case someone falls or in case an opportunity comes to him And that if they're going to go quarterback, it's going to be because the draft comes to them that way, and they think that Bo Nix or Michael Penix can be a franchise quarterback. And I know the connection, from Penix to Ryan Grubb is such an easy one to make. In fact, it's so easy that some people, and I've caught myself doing this a few times as well, might think, nah, it's not going to happen. It's low-hanging fruit. It's not going to match up draft-wise. We might end up looking back after draft day and thinking, oh, yeah, that was going to happen the whole time. Of course, it made sense. Sometimes the obvious does happen. I just wish, man, I'm telling you what, I could talk for an hour about NLI and what a disaster that's been. And I love the idea of players being compensated for the use of their name and image. That's where this all came from, was a lawsuit over a video game, but it has just been, it's just deteriorated into this crap show. I heard Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks on their podcast the other day talking about Jeremiah was relating a story from a coach he had talked to in college, who said, because you have limits, you have scholarship limits, you can only have 85 under scholarship. And so if you're going to go hit the portal hard and get some transfers to come in, you have to lose some spots. And apparently it's against the rules. You can't just go release a guy from his scholarship simply for the reason of clearing his spot. And so schools are literally, according to Jeremiah, paying players, using some of that collective money, that NLI money, to pay players to go into the portal. It's ridiculous. And what it's done is it's robbed a lot of the draft. It's robbed a lot of the depth of the draft. And I think we see this in quarterbacks, maybe more so than any other position, is unless the NFL advisory committee comes back to you and says, you're a first or second day pick in our view, then they're going to stay. If you're a third day pick in the NFL, you're not starting from day one. You're not getting a ton of money. There's no guarantee you're going to make a roster. There's certainly no job security there. But if you're even a day 3 pick in the NFL, pretty damn good chance that some school is going to pay you to stay. I think Cam Ward's the best example of that. Guy coming out of Washington State, someone I'm very familiar with, of course. I think he's got a ton of upside, can benefit from another year in school. But he initially, at one point, he explored the transfer portal, didn't see a fit, declared for the NFL draft, was generally being rated as an early day 3 pick, 4th, 5th round, from everything I saw. And that's kind of where I would have put him as well. And then he ends up going to Miami because they stepped up with a package that enticed him. Cam Ward would have probably, there's a good chance Cam Ward would have lit up the combine yesterday because his arm talent is real. And he might have been that guy that he would have had an opportunity to be the 7th guy and kind of be talked about as maybe there is someone you can grab on day 3 or late on day 2 that has starter upside. But those guys all go back to school now, right? Like, imagine if this draft had also had Quinn Ewers and Shadur Sanders and Grayson McCall, and I could name 5 or 6 others. But imagine how dynamic that would have been. The combine certainly would have been a lot more interesting. I hate that those guys just don't throw, and I feel like they just, one last little piece of commentary here. They need to start inviting more quarterbacks to the combine. Sam Hartman and his group was the only one running the 40, so he had to run it, take a couple of breaths, go back, run it again. Flowing locks. Invite more of them. I finally got to catch up and watch the Shrine game a couple of days ago, and John Reese Plumlee is a really fun, exciting player that I would have loved to have seen next to those guys at the combine. There's some other guys out there who put up some big numbers, and then some of the ones that they did invite didn't look like they belong there. Austin Reed, I wouldn't draft him in the USFL. So they got to figure that out. But it's a new landscape. The NLI thing has changed everything. Follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Join me tomorrow and be sure to subscribe to everything so you don't miss this episode. Really looking forward to this one. For those of you who watched some of my older podcasts, the Dan Cave or the Emerald City Sportscast, my dear good friend Eric Briggs and I used to joke when I first started doing my podcast that because I would have him on the show quite a bit, that anytime he and I call each other and talk about football, each one of those conversations can be a podcast episode. Just love his insight. He's down in the Phoenix area. He hears a lot of different things down there from some of the national sports radio and some of the local sports radio that he listens to down there. They have some really cool analysts that so he gets a little bit of an outside view as well. We're gonna go over the combine, kind of talk about guys that we thought stood out, guys that we liked, guys that disappointed, what direction he thinks the Seahawks might go in the first round, what direction he wants them to go, and take a look at some free agency as well, as we are now just 11 days away from the start of free agency. Man, it seems like it took forever for us to get to the combine, but now we are rocking and rolling heading into free agency. And we're going to know a lot more in a couple of weeks about what the draft might look like for the Seahawks. Mock drafts become a lot easier to do after you see some of the holes filled in free agency. Thanks again for watching and for all the support on the channel. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen and view. Until tomorrow, forever and always go Hawks. I am Dan Viens. Thanks for watching. Peace.